This is sometimes the hardest part of our job, is it not? I don't know what to write. I don't know what to say. More accurately, I'm going to ask you, how long has it been since you checked in with your characters, and the sooner the better. Let's go ahead and look at how we're turning their pain into power, and how your character's comeback arc is often your comeback or debut novel. See you in a bit. Welcome on back to another series on writing. My name is Jenna O'Malley. I am your soul writer, author of sci-fi fantasy with dashes of romance and nerdy references, such as, you guessed it, the Merna Annals. So, when it comes to writing stories that have impactful plots, nowadays we as writers are tempted to write real-life, reflectable, relatable, human qualities, experiences, conditions into our stories, regardless of whether they're historical, sci-fi, fantasy, mystery, thriller, even children's books are starting to get into topics that are heavier and heavier and more, to use a buzzword, traumatic. So heads up, in this series you're going to hear me use two terms outside of that big T trauma word. You're also going to hear me say trigger and glimmer. So I'm going to invite you to kind of use this series to look for both in your writing, to make your novel, your book, your novella, your short story, your flash fiction, your poetry, all the more impactful to today's audiences. Go ahead and check the description box below if you would like to consider some handouts that'll go with each of the episodes in our plotting and world building series, and there's going to be quite a few. You're more than welcome to watch them out of order, as it is my job to handle as many of these topics in isolation from one another as much as possible. I am quite aware that people are going to be at different paces and spaces in their writing. Either you're starting with, blank page, or you're coming back looking at revisions and possibly having to find a way to retroactively get some plot holes taken care of. We're all here for. So let me just go ahead and up front and say that a lot of books tend to aim to be as relatable as possible. After all, that is how we get readers, right? Right. At the same time, it's become debatable whether or not big T trauma should be involved. In my opinion, whether or not the writer's aim was to include those big T kind of incidences, I would venture to say that to the characters involved, the climactic moment in almost any story possibly could have either a trigger or a glimmer outcome to them. And the goal is for us who do tend to write these realistic to life big T moments in our stories, we do need to make sure we're giving a proper balance of those triggers and those glimmers. So the reason why I say that is to avoid sensationalizing big T traumas. Okay, I have another video I did about a year ago called Aces for Authors, and that workshop, along with the information in it, would be a plethora of explanation as to why it should be handled into a writing relatable life experiences with a pure, unadulterated sense of sensitivity from the beginning. Okay? Now, the questions that I do have kind of go in chunk today with the things we're looking at. So I want to make sure that you do know that we're looking at questions 1 through 3 first for this first section, where we're actually talking about developing the comeback arc. Now, this isn't necessarily your comeback novel. It could be your debut novel, but for some authors this could also be your comeback novel. So I do entice you to look closely at the character's comeback arc, okay? We're going to look at why the initial moment of the big T trauma happening is often better something that happened off page prior to the story in the early moments or in the climactic moments of the story. For example, one of my characters, Frey, we meet Frey in book 1, Bound by Fate and Blood of season 1, and we learn very quickly that Frey is struggling with a very common tendency for the time to like what comes out of poppy flowers a little too much. And it was a common trend in the time, just as common as it is for some of us to drink coffee. Nowadays, it was common back there and to use what the poppy flowers would give, opium. And Frey has to face that headlong, and there was a lot of research that I had to do about what it means to be an addict. Now, I grew up in a house with a recovered addict. I don't talk about it because that's not the dad I knew. my dad was a recovered alcoholic. So a lot of how Frey behaves in season 2, that's the stage of life I know my dad to be. My brothers necessarily didn't know that. My oldest brothers remember my dad when he was barely out of recovery. Different man is the way they would word it, a different man. So you need to be very sensitive to when does that traumatic moment happen in the character's life versus when does the reader hear about it, okay? Sometimes, like with what happened with Frey, it was off page of what got him into his addictive-like tendencies. Now, at the beginning of a story, still staying with book 1, Bound by Fate and Blood, a lot of people would consider what happens to Ian in the first 5 chapters of book 1, then known as Christian, later known as Ian, he gets kidnapped by someone who ends up being his best friend and basically brother from another mother, essentially. And it's because of getting kidnapped by Frey that a glimmer comes out of it. Ian meets the love of his life. Not just his best friend. He meets Frey, his best friend. He meets Bovary, one of his best friends. He meets Bjorn, his mentor and eventual best friend. And he meets several females that he considers to be his sister, but very clearly, when you first meet Ian, he understands he's in the market for a wife because of his age. He's in his mid-20s. It's typical of him in that era to have already possibly been married, and he's not. And lo and behold, he gets the girl. So I would definitely say that what started as a trigger eventually became a glimmer for him. So discuss with your characters how believable their moments are. Okay, don't make it contrived. Normally readers can tell when it's contrived, and they know when it's not meant to be a ha-ha, wink-wink, nudge-nudge, ha-ha-ha, funny moment. Stories that do that well are well loved by readers and authors alike because slight fourth wall break applies. However, I caution you to trample all over that boundary in unwelcoming ways. Be very sensitive to what makes that comeback arc possible. Okay? What point of the story causes the traumatic moment? If it happens in the climactic part of your story, you have far less time to examine the following action, pun intended, and 10-year puns, than you do, say, something that happened 2-3 books ago. So keep in mind, the type of story you're writing here, whether it's a standalone, a short story, a longer novel, a novella, dictates how much wiggle room you have to explore these things in tight, focused narrative. Also, you want to make sure that tropes are questioned. I'm not talking reading tropes. I'm talking like stereotypes, cliches, okay? So we're definitely starting to get into the impact of trauma on the reader relationship, on your ability to make a connection to them, but also look at how different different characters interact within what you're writing, okay? Everyone around Frey with his tendencies are like, yeah, dude, go do you at first. Now, mind you, for questions 4 and 5, you might have some characters who are willing to give certain answers at first in the story, and it may change later on. So, what's the later on for Frey? Book 3. That's how long it took for me to be able to get to address it. In book 3, for Frey and everybody else's own good, Neftiri says, that's it. Outside of, potion making for battle reasons, no substances outside of, alcohol can be consumed. Why? Well, the drinking water in the 1600s was probably not all that safe for immortals, no more than it was for humans, let's get real. So she's willing to give you, table wine, or, stuff like that really doesn't have, by comparison to what Frey was making, not just consuming, all that much, danger to him. It was safer than drinking the water at the time. So, he's fine. Is he? We had to see Frey kind of throw a fit a little bit, or choose not to and say, you know what, you're right. So he was supported through that. Now there's another character who's a mirror to him in this moment, Arya, who handles it the complete opposite way, as 180 across the table as you could get. And that's on purpose. So you can take a moment and put what you would call mirror characters, aka foils, F-O-I-L. It's not just an equation in math, just saying. It's also looking at, how much is your character like Hamlet versus how much is your character like Laertes. If you've ever read Hamlet, you know that Laertes is kind of the stereotypical pompous, well-trained, every woman in court wants to be with him kind of princely noble, whereas the actual prince is not so princely noble. So you can see through the different lenses of a reflection of the prism, the kaleidoscope of what it's like to live through something like this. Now, does everybody who go through big T trauma end up with a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual injury? No. However, when they do, and it becomes a part of what many authors and creators and book coaches call their misbelief about the world, you need to decide which is amplifying what and when. Big time and early on, and be very intentional in sensitive, caring, compassionate, thoughtful ways, especially if you yourself have not lived through something even remotely like this. We writers often write from a place of inspiration from our own lives. Why does Frey and Arya both struggle with addictive-like tendencies? Because it runs in my family. I've seen my dad survive it and my brother not. We'll word it that way in different ways. So reflections of what we witness are not always universal. Did I do research? Oh yeah, buddy, you bet I did. You bet I did. I reached out to people I know personally. I asked beta readers, could you pay close attention to this as well? And it can start as early on for those of you who are doing your plotting, plantsting, pansting modes. You can start considering those factors now and start doing concrete research. And English teacher me is going to say .edu.gov.org websites only, please, or it don't count. You're welcome. Your chat GPT, your Google search can bite my patootie compared to the actual primary reference material. Thank you very much. And yes, interviewing someone who lives this life is primary source material. Regardless of the big T trauma, regardless of the diagnosis, regardless of what's going on, if you yourself have not personally experienced this, ask. There are people who would rather help you get it more accurate. I'm not going to say right, because right is not correct. To get it more accurate to a community experience of what it's like to live through that versus an individual experience. And the individual matters. Normally, focusing on the community is what's going to bring everyone together to support the individual, both in the way of your readers and in the way you build your character relationships. So questions 4 and 5 in your handout will help you kind of redirect and guide those accordingly. Questions number 6 and 7 on your handout are going to correspond to the theme or the misbelief, okay? Now here, as an English teacher, let me get back up on my soapbox and go, a theme is a sentence, not a simple subject. Love is not a theme, that's a simple subject. Hello, romance authors. If that's your theme, kick it out the window, it sucks. It's not specific enough. It's too general. Yes, I feel like I'm talking about a thesis statement and an intro, but it still applies here. Essay writing skills apply. So, your universal theme, it should be a sentence, or at least a phrase. A short sentence or a short phrase counts. For example, love is a simple subject. But often when I was teaching K-12 education, I would say, according to things like The Legend of Zelda, love conquers over evil is a thing. Oh, yeah, that comes up in every single Zelda game because you always have the knight and the princess facing against the bad guy, regardless of what the Zelda game is. That is that franchise's formula, and it works as a theme. So, if I were to say what's the theme of all of my books, healing journeys and found families of merry misfits working together against what time says is their test. Bingo! If you were to say, really truly, what's the theme that all my characters butt their heads up against, it's a sense of belonging. Now, belonging is the simple subject. The theme is a healing journey that ends up with them getting the family they were meant to be with all along. Not just their soulmate. That's part of the family, don't get me wrong. Not in all families it's not, but in many families it is. So that's why the romance is part of it, but for me, the bromances are almost more important than the romances, for that reason, right? So my theme very much matters. Does each book have a slightly different take on that theme? Oh yeah. For example, Ian Sinclair has no clue that his dad has fought his future wife until after he meets his future wife, and his dad has no longer been around anymore. His sense of belonging comes into, my real bio family lied to me my whole life. Who do I really trust? He faces that as soon as chapter 2. Huh? Neftiri's facing it all the way back to the time when she was born in the year 300, not just, chapter 1 in 1665 of book 1. Because she's forced to be the queen that she doesn't want to be, that everyone wants to be queen, and she's like, I'm good at this. I can do this. I really don't want to do this. So you can see where already that healing path has them taking 2 completely different trajectories, and it's not even the end of chapter 2 or 3 in the book yet. So you can instill them early, and they don't have to be big T traumatic, but sometimes they are. So I challenge you to find the glimmers, the big G happiness, okay? I like calling it Big G because my brother George and his family, he's junior, his son is the third. So it's Big George and Little George. So your Big G, what's your big golly green giant of laughter about? That was my brother George. What's your Big G here? What's your Baloo the Bear type, bare necessities kind of joy that is going to be the foil or the mirror and make your theme be complete and full circle? So I'll see you in the next one, everybody. We're going to go ahead and take this concept by concept and get you through your drafting, your revision, your plotting, no matter where you are. If you did enjoy the video, go ahead and like, comment, share, subscribe if you made it this far. Purple heart down in that comment section. Ask any questions, share any comments, any insights you would like. And above all, take care of yourself. Now more than ever, our voices matter. Dang it.